Yeah, so I'll go ahead and get started with Not My Kid. One of our mission is to ensure every kid thrives by inspiring positive life choices, and our commitment is to offer the best in prevention and behavioral health and protect youth mental health and leverage the power of lived experience. We like to educate and build resiliency, inspire hope for the future, grow connection and communication.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Again, thanks so much for joining us. This is our Raising Resilient Kids webinar, and we're going to be doing monthly webinars together with notMYkid. So if this is the first one that you're joining for, we hope that you will keep coming back. This is the Partnership to End Addiction team that's partnering with notMYkid. I am the Director of Prevention Services. I'm here with Linda, who is our Senior VP of Prevention, and we also have a research assistant, Olivia. And so if you happen to catch our webinar last month on teen substance use, you probably remember that we mentioned resilience as a really important topic. And so today we're going to be going in depth on resilience, what it means, how we can foster resilience in kids, how we can protect their mental and physical health, how we can strengthen parent-child bonds and family functioning, and how we can promote the connection that kids have between, their school and the larger environment. And so what does it mean to raise a resilient kid? Here is our definition of resilience. Resilience is the crucial ability to withstand, overcome, and rebound from a challenging situation or experience. And so we believe that it's the responsibility of all adults who interact with children to help provide a consistent, stable, nurturing, and supportive environment. An environment that helps promote their mental and physical well-being, provides a protective shield against adversity, and fosters strength, growth, their future well-being, all of those things. And so at Partnership, we have a parent's guide to raising resilient kids, which is going to be the framework for this presentation. And so this guide is research-based best practices and resources that can strengthen all of those things that we talked about before. So mental and physical health, family bonds, school performance and engagement, neighborhoods. And we highlight practical parenting practices that can help foster the development of resilience. And our overall goal is to help prevent substance use and steer children away from other unhealthy or unsafe outcomes that can compromise their well-being. And so when we talk about resilience, these are some attributes of resilience. So in the individual, we have things like social and emotional skills, a positive temperament, self-efficacy. In the family unit, we talk about things like warmth and cohesion, strong, clear expectations, and parental involvement and monitoring. And then in kind of a larger community context, we talk about things like a kid's connection to their school, having a trusted adult mentor, and having strong social networks. And some of these attributes, there's definitely some of them that you want as much of it as possible. These attributes are protective in high amounts and risky in low amounts. So these would be things like the effort that someone puts into school, their social and emotional skills, the amount of safety in their environment. Those are ones that you want as much of as possible. Some other attributes, though, you want like a medium amount. So having too little is definitely risky, but then having too much is also bad. And some of this might feel a little counterintuitive, but things like wealth would be included in this category. Extreme wealth does not lead to good outcomes. And things like parental monitoring. So definitely having too little is obviously a bad thing, but having too much of it, like helicopter parenting, not allowing kids privacy or ways to do fun, thrill-seeking behaviors in a safe way, that type of stuff also leads to bad outcomes. And so we want you to think of resilience as a skill that can be practiced and honed. It's not something that someone either has or doesn't have. This is a dynamic process that can change and be built over time. And so acknowledging the risk factors and protective factors that exist naturally in your family can help you to focus your area and energy on the things that you can change. And so when we talk about focusing energy, we're thinking about how we can't change someone's family history or their genetic makeup, but we can have an impact on how connected they feel to their school, the amount of sleep that they're getting every night, whether we spend quality time with them when they come home. These are all things that we can change and have an impact on. And so now we're going to go into some of those evidence-based parenting strategies that we have. And as a parent, you can't possibly eliminate all obstacles to healthy development, and we know that. But decades of research shows that parents are the single most important influence on children's attitudes and behaviors and are the critical source of children's resilience. And so these are the 10 key protective parenting strategies that we have. We're going to go through all 10 one by one, explain what they are, answer some common questions about them, and provide a practical tip for each. And so we're not telling you how to raise your kid. You are obviously the expert on your own child and your own experience. And so you'll know what works and what doesn't work. But these are evidence-based tips that can help in a situation when you're kind of searching for some guidance. Parenting is obviously very hard and there's no perfect solutions, but these strategies can help. And so our first one is starting early. It's never too early to help promote healthy attitudes, emotions, and behaviors. And it's also never too early to start noticing and responding to risk factors. So what do we mean when we say responding to risk factors? This means being aware of anything that could bring adversity into your child's life. So maybe they're neurodivergent, and so building effective communication skills might take some extra practice. Or maybe your child is kind of anxious, and so acknowledging that and maybe getting them some help with someone who knows cognitive behavioral therapy can help change some of that anxious thinking. Maybe there's not a lot of outdoor green space where you live, so making extra time for some weekend adventures or enrolling them in a sport nearby could help. And so being proactive about what your child's going to be up against can help put them on the path to success. And so our practical tip for this, how do we promote healthy behaviors early? So you can allow little kids autonomy over small family and household tasks that they can accomplish, maybe with some encouragement and support, so that they can succeed at something and feel like they're contributing. And this could be as easy as helping to prepare dinner or folding some laundry. This allows them to make little mistakes, but showing them that they can try again and get corrected along the way. Strategy 2, know the facts and be the credible source for your kids. So that means keep learning from trusted sources and know when to say you don't know something. Saying, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll help you figure it out is always better than taking a guess, or even worse, lying. Parents can get a redo and can admit to mistakes. If you said the wrong thing at some point or didn't convey everything that you should have the first time, you can pick it back up and correct yourself. It's good for kids to see that kind of modeling, being able to change your mind when you learn new information, seeking out better information, learning from our mistakes. And so how do I know if something's a credible source? That can be really hard at times, and we could do a whole lecture just on that. But getting and checking information with your pediatrician is always a good idea. We would say to be skeptical of any information that's obviously trying to sell you a product. And just because someone has millions of followers on social media doesn't always mean that they're a reliable source. So we encourage you to always get a second opinion. And our practical tip with this one is that sources of information online that come from sites that end in .gov, .edu, or .org are almost always going to be more credible than something that comes from a .com website. So you can check those URLs. Be a good model for health and resilience. So, even if they aren't always listening to you, your children are watching what you do. So we want to normalize health and resilient behavior, but also normalize making mistakes, having imperfections, but bouncing back and trying to improve. And also important, modeling seeking help when needed. And so, some people might say, but I can't be perfect all of the time and they're watching me. But being imperfect is important to model. Flaws and slip-ups, they can help us demonstrate effective coping and social skills. We can model how to apologize, forgive, and being honest about our shortcomings. These are all really important things to model. So it's not just about being the perfect parent all the time that they can see. And our practical tip for this, if you are a parent that drinks alcohol, try your very best not to convey that it takes a drink or a pill to relax. Even something like remarking about needing wine after a really long day can normalize drinking as a coping mechanism and can help plant some of those unhealthy seeds in the kid's brain. So, the wine mom trope is like, it's a funny meme and kind of cheeky, but it does promote alcohol use as an escape or a way to cope with life stresses. So it's important for kids to see, if their parent drinks, important for them to see alcohol as something that kids can use or adults can use responsibly for enjoyment and not as like a necessity in times of stress. Number 4, communicating openly and honestly. So having open conversations to develop mutual trust. And this doesn't have to be like a big sit down formal discussion. It can be easier and even more effective just to keep it brief, casual, and ongoing. And you can take advantage of natural opportunities to bring up tough topics. You could be walking past a vape shop and bring it up to talk about it then, or you could see someone smoking weed in a movie and bring it up and talk about it then. So the question here, what do I do if my kid asks if I've ever used drugs? Do I answer honestly? This is a good question that we get frequently. And the truth is that experts kind of disagree on this, and you'll see kind of differing information, but the best way to answer this, even though it's kind of annoying, is that it's going to depend on your experience and it's going to depend on your kid. There are wrong ways to go about this conversation. Oversharing is definitely a possibility. And then lying has the potential to break trust and you could lose your credibility. So you want to avoid giving more information than was asked, but share what you've learned as you look back on it while focusing on the larger point, and that larger point being you don't want them to use drugs. And so an example of that could be, I tried marijuana because some kids I knew were experimenting and I thought I needed to try drugs to fit in. And then it took me a while to discover that that's not a good reason to do anything. Do you ever feel pressure like that? And so we want you to keep asking questions and remember that it's not about your past, it's about their future. And so our practical tip about this is that you could use a car ride as an opportunity to have a talk about substance use. The lack of direct eye contact in a situation like that can help a kid feel more at ease, and there's an inherent time limit to them. So you can park the car and the conversation at the same time. Number 5, sharing your expectations. Set clear boundaries and limits, make your stances known, and follow through on agreed upon consequences. And base those expectations in love and concern, and not just because I said so. So the question here, how do I know what is a reasonable boundary and what might be too strict? Boundaries and expectations are going to look different for every family. And just as a bedtime would change as kids get older, other boundaries are going to change too. And so if An important thing is that if kids feel like they've been a part of the conversation and the decision when it comes to a rule, they're going to be more likely to abide by that rule. And so our practical tip kind of stems off of that. So if a specific boundary is continually getting broken, have a family meeting. You can ask process-focused questions like, what's getting in the way of you sticking with what we agreed to? Or how can I support you in sticking with this rule? Questions like that can open up the discussion and can go a long way towards family cohesion. Monitoring behavior and well-being. This includes spending quality time together and asking lots of questions. It involves knowing where your children are, what they're doing, and who they're with, keeping an eye on screen time and social media presence. And so when it comes to quality time, things like family meals and just in general spending time together can allow parents the opportunity to monitor significant changes in emotions, appearance, behavior, and so you can learn if something's wrong. And our question here, at what age should I let my kid have social media? And that comes up a lot. Another difficult question that has a lot of different answers, but legally, most social media apps require a user to be 13. That does not mean that a 13-year-old is equipped to handle, unmonitored, free access to all parts of the internet. Common Sense Media, which is a great nonprofit that's devoted to this topic, they rate most social media sites as being appropriate for like 15, 16-year-olds. But more than any specific age, you're looking for maturity and responsibility. And so most experts view it really as any other potentially addicting substance, kind of wait as long for it as you reasonably can. And so while social media can definitely promote community and connection in so many ways, kids can develop symptoms of a clinical dependency to social media, just like they could develop a dependency to nicotine or other substances. And the effects of too much screen time, things like sleep deprivation, are a lot more detrimental to a teen than they would be for an adult. And so parents have a right and a responsibility to be involved in what their kids are doing on the internet, and they should be open and honest about that. Letting their kid know that they're going to be checking and monitoring what they're doing, and that's just part of the agreement of getting a phone and social media accounts. And so parents should emphasize that they're not doing it to be nosy or to be in their business, but just to do their job as parents and keep them safe. And so wait as long as you reasonably can, enact screen time limits, especially in the beginning, and have an ongoing dialogue about what they're seeing and doing online. And so our practical tip here is to encourage your kids to use parental monitoring as an excuse to not post risky things or engage in high-risk behavior. Letting kids use their parents as an excuse, even if it's a fake excuse and it's not true, is really useful. And so coaching your kid to say, sorry, my mom checks my phone and she would definitely ground me if she saw that. Even if you wouldn't really ground them, even if you wouldn't ground them or whatever consequence they say, who cares? You want your kid to know that they can always use you as an excuse to get out of anything that makes them uncomfortable. So they can lie as much as they want in the service of keeping themselves safe. Taking a health approach as opposed to a punitive one. Supporting health rather than punishing unsafe behaviors. The primary concern should always be protecting health, safety, and well-being. The question here, but what if they do something wrong? Do I not punish them? It's really unlikely that your kid is going to behave poorly just for the fun of it. There's usually a rational reason for outbursts, and there's often a reasonable solution. But we're not telling you to not have consequences when your child violates rules or does things that they're not supposed to. A health-based approach simply means that consequences are explained and agreed upon in advance of rules being broken, and the focus is just always on safety and well-being, not just obedience for obedience sake. And so our practical tip here is If you discover that your child has lied to you, try to figure out the why as opposed to going straight to reprimanding. Understanding the motivation and why this lie happened you can help get down to the bottom of it and help it to not happen again in the future. Number 8, encouraging healthy risk-taking and emotion expression. This is about helping your kid go beyond their comfort zone in a safe way. Stress, anger, fear, these are all normal emotions. And we don't want to suppress those, but we want to, what matters is how they're expressed and whether or not they persist in times of not risk-taking. So what if my kid's not a thrill seeker? That was me. I'm pretty risk averse and was even as a teenager. But that's fine too. So you can let them decide what they're interested in and help them pursue it. It's important for them just to be stimulated and challenged so that they can gain confidence and self-efficacy. But for kids that are naturally thrill-seeking, recognizing that early and putting them into activities that can help harness that energy can help them avoid high-risk behavior. And so our practical tip here, if you're wondering how to figure out what type of activity would be best for your specific kid, these are some questions that you could brainstorm with them. What makes you the happiest? What is the most valuable thing to you? What's the most exciting thing you could imagine doing? If you had a whole day to do whatever you want, what would you do? When it comes to what makes you happy, is it things like sports, physical activities, or is it creative ones like drawing or music, or emotional ones like working with animals and things like that? Positive reinforcement is number 9. So give positive feedback when your child shows effort or engages in desired attitudes and behaviors. And so the question here is, what if my child doesn't do anything worth praising? And this was a real question that we got from a frustrated parent. And we understand that it really might feel like this sometimes, but we want to stress that behaviors that get praised or positively reinforced are the behaviors that are more likely to continue. So even just normal daily tasks like getting up on your own, getting to school without complaining, putting effort into homework, these are all small things that can be positively reinforced and be praised. So our practical tip here is, when doing positive reinforcement, we want to focus on the effort, not the outcome. So it's more effective reinforcement to say, I'm really proud of how much effort you put into studying for that test. You worked really hard, rather than great job getting an A. That effort is what we really want to positively reinforce, because we want that to continue. Knowing your child's risk level and respond accordingly. And this is our last tip. So we want to be vigilant and responsive to signs of risk. We want to know when to seek help for your child and for yourself. And we want to make sure that the response matches the risk level. And so when we say that, we mean trying not to underreact or overreact. If a kid doesn't need inpatient substance use treatment if they tried marijuana or tried vaping. But for a situation where a teen is struggling with a depressive episode and drinking frequently, we're going to need to escalate the response to something like that. And so our question here, I found out my teen tried marijuana. How do I convey the seriousness of this without overreacting? And so one thing that we say in this case is, especially if you have a history of addiction in your family, your child is much more likely to have a problem that could lead to addiction than other kids that maybe try marijuana. And so understanding that risk and explaining that to your child in a very clear and concise way is important. And so we want to help to think of addiction as any other health problem that would be running in your family, and explain it like that they would have to be more careful, and that their risk would be slightly higher than maybe some of their peers and their friends. And also in a situation like this, some of our tips are to, again, going back to that health-based approach, remember that this is about their health and well-being, not bad behavior and punishments. Come from a place of love and concern, not anger. Keep a cool head, be direct, try to withhold judgment if possible. listen carefully to what they say without interrupting, and trying to get down to why. So if they tried marijuana, trying to understand why. That why can help you understand where your child may need help if they need help addressing peer pressure, curiosity, boredom, anxiety, anything that they might be using marijuana to self-medicate. You can talk about your own memories and mistakes so that your teen can relate with you. And again, share your expectations that at the end of the day, you don't want them to use substances. And the practical tip here, do your best to not have those difficult conversations in the heat of the moment. In relationships, they always say, like, don't go to bed angry, but we kind of are telling you to do that in this case. When it comes to kids, it might be more beneficial to revisit the conversation in the morning when you can have a more productive discussion with a clear, calm approach.
Thank you, Corey. Are you able to hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah. Gosh, I wish I heard this presentation before I raised my kids or when they were little. Lots of good tips in there that are hard to implement, but they're really worth it. So I just kind of want to take this in a slightly different direction, really kind of focusing a little bit more on what the research shows and why these raising resilient kids tips are really so important for protecting young people's mental health, physical health, improving and fostering family bonding, and ensuring that children are well connected to their schools and communities, because those are all protective against not just substance use, but a whole range of outcomes that we kind of want to help our kids avoid. So you can go to the next slide. So what we know is that there are millions of children, unfortunately, in the United States who struggle with mental health problems. And this problem has become more severe and serious since the pandemic. We know that among young children, ages around 2 to 8, about 1 in 6 are diagnosed with a mental health disorder. And we also know that untreated behavioral or mental health problems really increase the risk of substance use and the development of what's called co-occurring disorders, where substance use disorders and mental health disorders coexist, sort of exacerbate one another, and really create a problem that can be treated, but it really, the earlier it's caught and the more it's sort of tamped down and prevented, the better outcomes there are for the children. So we know, as Corey said, that if a child actually has a mental health disorder or behavioral disorder, it typically does require intervention from a trained healthcare professional. And absolutely true that the earlier that intervention is provided, the better. Often it does not necessarily have to be through medications. It could be through therapy, et cetera, behavioral management, but there are certainly extensive benefits to starting early instead of waiting and seeing and hoping things get better. There's a limit to what parents can do to prevent mental health problems in youth. That's for sure. A lot of it is genetic, inherited, beyond our control. But there are a lot of things that parents can do to kind of foster the resilience so that the risk factors that produce these mental health problems are sort of limited a little bit, and children's vulnerability to developing a mental health disorder is a little bit limited as well. Go to the next slide, please. So we know that one of the main risk factors for mental health disorders, for substance use problems, for a whole range of negative outcomes are what's known as adverse childhood experiences. And you see here on the list what some of those are according to the definition of adverse childhood experiences. There's a whole range of other life experiences that can happen to a child from an early age on that can increase their risk. But this is how this concept of adverse childhood experience, or ACEs, is defined. And we know that it affects about 34.8 million children ages 0 to 17. The downstream effects of these kind of childhood adversities are super expensive. If to kind of be, crass about it, to the US economy, it's about an estimated $750 billion a year, because left untreated, kids who are exposed to high doses of trauma or have multiple risk factors in their life, they are at higher risk of developing heart disease, lung cancer, shorter life expectancy, all sorts of really serious negative health outcomes. At the same time, we know that stable and nurturing relationships within the family could really help and protect kids from these sorts of adversities and reduce not just the personal and social and mental health costs, but actual costs as well. Things that we see later on in terms of the requiring, special education or incarceration even. So there's a lot to be said for addressing these as early as possible. And what we see here is that, the risks of adverse childhood experiences really compound over time. And that the more of these a person has, the higher their risk of developing specifically a substance use disorder as they get older, and other problems. And what's very clear is that the effects of these early experiences are often intergenerational. They really produce physiological changes in the structure and function of the brain. If a child has persistent and relentless stressors, it's kind of toxic to the developing brain, and it really interferes with healthy development, healthy social bonds, and healthy functioning. So what we talk about when we think about child mental health is that there's a whole range of protective factors that could really help a kid, even if they're on this trajectory due to adverse early experiences. It could really buffer the harms that come from those. So these are things like, a lot of which Corey mentioned already, helping children develop the ability to sort of recognize and control and express their reactions and emotions in a measured and appropriate manner. No one's saying to suppress, the unpleasant feelings or sadness or anxiety, but learning to recognize them as important clues to how one is reacting to an experience. And so that they could then understand, oh, I'm feeling very anxious in this setting. Maybe this is something I need to manage differently in my life. And these are things that parents could really help kids with. And parents can do this by serving as models and guides for their kids' emotional reactions, helping them make sense of why they're feeling the way they are, what kind of behavior changes can help. And it's little things like, if a child experiences joy from something that a parent is like, oh, I don't want you doing that, then parents can teach them that even though a certain experience feels really good, it isn't healthy or safe for them in the long term. So think about something like riding a bike without a helmet. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. I loved riding my bike without a helmet. A helmet wasn't a thing. Your hair is blowing in the wind. It feels great. Now we know that's crazy. You don't let kids do that, right? So even though something could feel good, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for you. Or driving really fast with music blaring, super fun, not good for you. So these are things that parents could say, instead of just saying, don't ever do that. It's acknowledging the joy that can come from it and the positivity, but then explaining really as much as you can why it's still not a great thing to do. And then on the flip side, if you feel that they're frustrated or angry about an experience that you actually know is good for them or healthy or safe, it really helps to acknowledge that it may not feel so good in the moment or be so fun or exciting, but that it's good for them in the future. So things like little kids who don't want to eat their vegetables, or a teenager who needs to skip a party so that they could study for a test. You can expect those kind of negative feelings and sort of reactions, and those are normal for kids to have. So it's not the reaction or the emotion that we're trying to tamp down, it's how they respond to it. They get to express negative emotions. That's very healthy and normal, but just having some context for it and not overreacting or having those emotions persist is really what we're going for. So then in terms of physical health, these tips that Corey was mentioning are really useful as well for protecting our children's physical health as well. So, helping children develop habits that protect their physical health, while also addressing the threats to their physical health as early as possible, is really important. And it also helps them increase their sense of confidence and strength and resilience, stamina, and the ability to sort of take on life challenges and benefit from its opportunities. So all this is sort of setting the stage for later on when you do have to have those conversations about, let's say, substance use and why it's not good for them physically. If throughout their life they're hearing the why it is so important to protect their bodies and their health and be strong and healthy, then it will make more sense to them when they turn 14 and you say, well, if you vape, you're ingesting all sorts of toxic chemicals into your body, and that's not a good thing. Kids who have learned to value their health, they will potentially appreciate those messages more and be more open to receiving them. So I just want to acknowledge, obviously, that some physical health conditions that kids have are completely unavoidable, and there's very little that parents could do to alleviate some of the pain and suffering that comes with some of these physical illnesses or conditions. And we do know that many children really do face undue burdens due to largely, in many cases, preventable health conditions, but sometimes they're not preventable. But there are certain things that we can do to sort of reduce, the negative outcomes of some that are more in parents' control. So things like a poor diet or a lack of exercise or inadequate sleep, clearly substance use, and, not staying on top of visits to the pediatrician. And again, there are always these social determinants of why some people have a harder time doing these than others in certain families. And it's just the point here is, to the extent possible, that parents can enhance a child's nutrition, exercise, sleep, and monitoring by a physician or a healthcare provider, then that really is a lot that can be done, even in the context of some pre-existing conditions that kids might have that are harder to address. So, for example, when it comes to physical health, we know how important it is to ensure children's nutrition and exercise. And it sounds very preachy and everybody knows it, and it's very hard to implement in many cases. But the truth is that there is a significant portion of our population of kids who are obese, and a very scary number who are actually food insecure or malnourished or do not have proper nutrition. And we know how important healthy food is for children's physical development. It's also important for their brain development, for their ability to be resilient and to buffer, inevitable risks that come kids' ways. So, there are certainly things within certain communities or neighborhoods that are very hard for parents to overcome, such as a lack of access to safe parks and playgrounds, and, too much screen time. I know that that's a common thing we're always hearing about. Some of these are in parents' control, some of these are not. And that's why, just side point, at Partnership to End Addiction, we try and address these issues on the policy level as well, because some of these things are not fully in parents' control. But I just kind of want to review these to demonstrate how all of these things really do play a role in children's mental health, physical health, and resilience. So as Corey said earlier, I can't emphasize this enough, inadequate sleep is a huge problem nowadays for children. It's for adults as well, but there's just tons of research. It's really just well established that inadequate sleep interferes with young people's brain development, especially in adolescence. It can interfere with, healthy growth physically as well. But we also know that, kids who have proper sleep have lower risk of substance use and other mental health and physical health problems. So the relationship is really quite strong. So whatever parents can do to ensure that their kids are getting enough sleep, that's something that we really want to emphasize. Obviously, use of an addictive substance at a young age substantially increases the risk of developing a substance use disorder and a whole range of other problems. And again, the limited access to quality health care is really a significant challenge for many families. But in terms of protective factors, there are many things that we could do to promote physical health. The two big ones that I just want to emphasize here, seeing a pediatrician or a healthcare provider regularly is really important. They can kind of keep track. They can sort of give some education to parents and kids about what they need to keep an eye on. They could screen for early signs of a problem. And the other one is really to prevent avoidable injuries. The types of injuries that kids are most vulnerable to are going to change as they get older. So for young kids, it's things like drowning, unfortunately, certainly poisoning when it comes to ingesting certain substances like opioids, pills, alcohol, nicotine, inadvertently, very dangerous for young people, which is why if parents have those substances in the home, they really need to keep them out of sight and out of reach of children. And it's really important for parents to kind of be familiar with what some of these risks are in order to help mitigate these negative outcomes for kids. The other thing we want to just kind of review quickly is the importance of forming strong parent-child bonds to improve family functioning. So, it sounds very cliche, but really the unconditional and consistent support from parents to their children is what's going to foster strength in a family and the sense of safety and security that kids have. And it's really that sense of safety and security that underlies resilience for children. If they do not feel safe and secure, they do not have the wherewithal to kind of bounce back from challenges, take on new challenges, and just grow and develop in a proper way. And it's becoming, obviously, again, is my policy perspective, clear that many of the obstacles that families face to forming these strong and secure and stable and protective families are outside the control of individuals in the family. But that said, there are still things that parents and other caregivers can do even in those situations. So the risk factors that are within a family that interferes with proper functioning and can sort of damage a child's ability to develop resilience are sort of persistent family conflict that are intense and frequent instances of this kind of conflict. And that can include nonverbal anger, which I think a lot of times people think if it's quiet and sort of kept under the rug and the kids are not seeing it, but kids get it when there's, the silent treatment and the sort of silent fuming that can go on in a family. And there's research that really shows that over time, if this persists, it can cause this kind of toxic stress in kids and can really produce lasting health effects. So obviously, it's easy to say, don't have family conflict. That's not what I'm trying to say here, but it's just to kind of have this awareness that even if you think it's sort of behind the scenes, your kids are not aware, kids are aware, and it can have really long-term effects on them. So the other thing that is a significant risk factor that can interfere with kids' resilience, obviously, is a lack of quality time with the family, between parents and kids, or just all together as a family unit. And that doesn't mean you have to have these massive vacations and outings and all-day affairs. It could just mean having a snack together with kids, or having a little chat on your walk to school or on a drive. Even small things, it should just be frequent and consistent. Those are really important for building family bonds. Another thing we see a lot is when parents sort of have this adversarial approach with their kids, especially the teenagers. It's sort of an us against them vibe, and it really can sort of, I don't know.
Did we lose Linda?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking happened.
Oh, you're back.
Oh, there she is.
You froze for a second, Linda.
Oh, sorry. Am I okay now?
I think so.
Yeah,
And
sorry.
the last thing we heard was teenagers, us against them, adversarial approach.
Great. Yeah. So we don't want that. And it happens naturally to people who are parents of teenagers, because teenagers could be pretty frustrating. But it's very important to kind of think back to when you were teenagers and try and take their perspective and understand why they do what they do, and sort of be a partner with them in facing life instead of against them as much as possible. And one way to do that, really, and something that we often forget as our kids, as we're raising our kids, is to inject a lot of sort of fun and levity. And you could joke around and you could be silly with your kids. And it seems like such a little thing, but it actually is just so healthy for better family functioning and for building sort of trust and close relationships. So again, as Corey said repeatedly, we want to take this health-based approach to family interactions where we're focusing on kids' health and safety, not punishing as, to the extent possible, recognizing that kids' behaviors make sense. They do things for a reason. They're typically not so irrational, even if they may seem that way sometimes. And the extent to which we can understand their motivations behind their behaviors can help, we can understand how better to help satisfy those needs in ways that are healthier and safer. And then the last bit I'd like to just quickly talk about is the importance of kids having a strong connection to their schools and communities to the extent possible. And to some extent, this is something parents can do. To some extent, it isn't. But as much as we could foster this connection, we know from tons of research that kids who feel connected to their school and to their community are more likely to engage in healthy behaviors and succeed academically and socially. And these kind of connections really equip kids with the essential skills that they need to engage socially, to develop their academic abilities, and to really prepare them for adulthood. So I already said that. You can, thanks. So what are some of the key risk factors for reducing this kind of connection? Well, we know that kids who experience it, the previous things we talked about, which are mental, physical, or family problems, understandably have a harder time feeling connected or invested in their schools and communities. Social isolation and loneliness is a huge topic that keeps coming up now, and for good reason, because it is such a huge risk factor for kids not developing resilience and for developing serious problems as they get older. And what happens is if a kid is isolated or lonely, they avoid school or community activities or social engagements, which just kind of perpetuates the cycle of this loneliness and isolation. And it can really impede their health, mental, physical, and social development. And sometimes this, avoidance comes because kids are feeling unsafe around their peers. So let's say there's somebody who is bullied, or if they live in a physically unsafe neighborhood. All these things are certainly important to consider, but at the same time, they're important to address as early as possible and seek help from community resources to the extent possible, because these things really stand in the way of kids' development. One thing we know from tons of research is the really tremendous benefit of adult mentorship. So every child needs to have at least one trusted adult in their life. It could be their parents. It does not have to be their parents. It could be an older sibling or a cousin. It could be a coach. It could be a religious leader. But the research is very clear that even just that one trusted adult really does a whole lot in terms of fostering resilience in kids. We want to offer them as many safe and challenging activities as we can so that they get to use their sort of natural risk-taking tendencies in a healthy way that's going to allow them to fail sometimes and realize they could still have fun. They could try again. They can bounce back. Not everything is a huge deal, and also improve their social skills as well. And to the extent possible, we know that having kids participate in volunteering or civic engagement or community really, did I freeze again? No.
No, you're good.
Okay. Really helps kids develop as well, because one of the most important things for resilience and for healthy development is for kids to feel like what they do matters to their family, matters to their friends, matters to their school, matters to their community, because that's what keeps them going. I'll pass it back to you, Corey, for this part.
Yep, great. And so to close us out here, I just wanted to go quickly through some resources that Partnership has on our website if you're interested in this topic and want some more info about it. These are all going to be on our website, which is drugfree.org. And so we have this Raising Resilient Kids guide on our website that you can download and look at for free. We have a text messaging program where you can get text message reminders about some of these tips. And the instructions to join that are also on our website, drugfree.org. We have playbooks, things that you can download and look at whenever you're looking for some guidance when it comes to being the parent of a preteen or the parent of a teen, more tips and strategies to kind of guide you along in that. And then we have a substance use risk assessment tool. So you can fill out, it's like 5 minutes or so worth of questions designed to help you better understand the risks that your child may face based on things like family history, personality, the environment, things like that. This is also available in Spanish. And it's not a diagnostic tool. This is more of like a, how worried should I be based on the current circumstances? And then the tool will direct you to some resources and things that you can use based on your answers. Yeah, and so now we're at the point where we can answer any questions anyone has. I don't know how much time we have, but hopefully time.
There were
two
questions in there. Looks like there are 2 questions in the chat.
Oh, great.
So one was, how much time is enough to create and maintain a connection? Such a good question. If I could take that one, I would say it doesn't take a lot of time. I think the key point there is the consistency of it. So it's not like a check-in once a week, but if every day at several points throughout the day, it could just be a brief check-in. And parents can get frustrated at their teenagers who prefer to talk through text instead of in person. But the reality is that even that sometimes is really quite healthy. You can sort of send little cute things to each other. You could tell a little bit about your day. Your child will feel like they could just sort of send you something quick and that's it. So even if it's at that level of just texting, as long as it's happening a couple of times throughout the day, it could be brief, that's fine. It's just kind of keeping that connection, so that when something does come up, it's not like, oh no, I haven't talked, had a real conversation with my mom in days. How am I supposed to bring this up all of a sudden? The communication lines are open. So there you go. It's open now. And then you could just bring stuff up more easily. I think there was one other.
Yeah, it's under the answered option.
Gotcha. What if you can see the pull of video games and screen time on your child, and the things that they're most interested in is being on the screen, even if it's being productive, like creating video games and coding? I'll just say, as a parent who has two teenagers, assuming that all video game time and screen time is bad is not really accurate, because especially nowadays, a lot of the video games are social. Kids are on there with friends and they're sort of chatting and talking and engaging the whole time. So it sort of depends on how the child is using it. So if they're on there a bit and they're doing something productive and creative with it, then that's great. That's an activity. If they're engaging in a fun social way with their friends, also great. Oftentimes it goes in bad directions and you might hear some cursing and words that you don't want to hear, especially when you're teenagers. So you can always address that and sort of tamp it down. One thing to be concerned about is sometimes kids are playing video games with strangers. It is an opening for people who are a little more predatory to kind of try and get to kids. So you do want to be careful about that. To the extent that you could sort of be a fly on the wall and listen and hear what's happening as your child is playing, that's really helpful. And then you can always, sort of have a conversation with them later on if something is coming up that seems concerning. Another tip that I've heard that I think is really helpful is if a child is really kind of glued to playing video games or their screens, you could talk with them about saying, hey, let's do it this way. How about you play for an hour and then you take a break outside for a half an hour and do something physical, or go see your friend. And then you could, so setting some limits on the time. And it obviously depends on the child. It depends on their schoolwork. It depends on their age. It depends on whether they have other means of engaging socially or being physical, but just being attuned to all that and having these conversations is really important. But you don't have to have the feeling that anytime your kid's playing a video game or is on the screen, it's like a catastrophe, because it's not always the case. I don't know, Corey, if you had anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, I think that's great. I was just going to say, kind of having agreed upon boundaries, like you're not going to play after 10 p.m. We're not going to stay up all night doing this. And then if they're a part of that conversation and creating those boundaries and rules, then they're going to be a lot more willing to kind of stick with those rules. But yeah, again, just like that health-based approach, like this is great as long as it's not getting in the way of your health and safety.
Yeah, thank you, Linda and Corey. I do want to there is one more question that I would like to share. This is a question that gets asked often by parents, especially when they have different age ranges in the home. And what is the best way to have these conversations with their children? Is it better to have them all together and kind of have each one of them help each other out? Or do you feel like these conversations should be had separately with the different age ranges?
You can go ahead, Corey, if you.
I mean, what comes to mind first is that I think this idea of not needing to be like a formal sit down conversation. It doesn't have to be like, okay, we're going to talk about drugs now, and so the 6-year-old needs to leave the room. As long as you're kind of laying the seeds of like, we can talk about all of these things throughout childhood together, that and if things come up, I think about, I had an older sister growing up, and so I do feel like I was exposed to things earlier than she was, technically, kind of in the lifespan. But it then became the fact that like my sister was kind of my mentor, that like knew how to guide me through these things. So you can use older and younger sibling dynamics definitely for good. But I don't think it has to be like we're only going to talk about these things with the older sibling. I think there's Linda, do you have more to add?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I do think that there are certain things that are, age appropriate and not age appropriate. So let's say if you're talking about, substance use prevention, you wouldn't want to talk with, a 5-year-old about, why they shouldn't smoke weed or marijuana, but you can talk about why, using a cigarette is so yucky and unhealthy, and we won't want to put anything in our body. And even more importantly, medicine. This is one that comes up a lot. So we're very nervous now about kids using prescription medications, misusing them. This is a conversation that starts from year one. Not every little ailment or injury has to be treated with medicine. And if medicine is being given, it's really talked about in terms of, well, this is why you're getting it, and it's for this reason, and only until you feel better, and then that's it. So kind of just sort of teaching kids in an age appropriate way that when you're putting something in your body, you better have a good reason for it, and it should make sense. And if you do it in an incorrect way, that's not how your parent or your doctor prescribed it for you, then that's going to be damaging. And that's something, so there are these age appropriate moments, but more important is what Corey said. This is not like, okay, family meeting, everyone sit down on the couch and size order, and we're going to talk about drugs. It's just not how it works for kids. They'll roll their eyes, they won't listen, and it's just not effective.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for that. And we appreciate you both being here. Is there anything either of you wants to add before we?
I would just add, I know Corey shared some of our resources that are very directly related to this, but to your question, for example, on our website, we just have so much more. Like, we literally have how to talk to kids at every age about substance use with specific tips. We have, how to talk with your kid about marijuana, because that's a tricky one that parents don't know how to do. So if you just kind of look around on our website, you are going to pretty much find answers to any of your questions. And then here are here's our contact information. If anything does occur to you later on, please just reach out. We're happy to answer.
Yes, well, thank you both for being here. Thank you all for coming and joining this webinar. In the chat, I did drop our next webinar. It will be December 8th at 12. And it's a substance deep dive on alcohol. So the link is there to register. But thank you so much for being present. And everybody have a good day.